We're running late already. We've only just got a quorum, so I'll open this meeting of the Planning Committee, Committee Whakariti Mahiri, on the 6th of November. Welcome the members and welcome members of the public and those coming before us here today. I'll take the apologies first. I have an apology from Councillor Collins, absence on council business, Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Sayers for absence, Mayor Phil Goff for lateness on council business, Councillor Bartley, Councillor Walker, Councillor Watson for lateness, Councillor Hulse for early departure, and we'll take a note of those. So I'll move those.
Can I just, sorry.
Councillor Hulse.
Just to explain, I think we need to be clear and transparent about where we are going and what we're doing. I'm not prepared to accept the recommendations because I'm not too sure what council business means, and I think we should actually say where we are on council business. I'm going to have to leave early, but I'll be back in time for our workshops because I have an emergency dental treatment. I had a tooth drop out on me, so I'm in a lot of pain. So that's where I'm going. So I'm just explaining that. So I'm not too sure whether Councillor Collins is on council business. I'd like to know what that council business is. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have anything from Councillor Collins on what that business is, but look, I just take it as it is presented to me, and good question. And Mayor Phil Goff, I could add that Mayor Phil Goff is opening a cycling facility, a BMX track at Hooton Reserve up north.
Thank you. That's all I ask, Mr. Chair. I think it's quite appropriate if we're putting in apologies for on-council business. We need to say where we are. I think that's entirely appropriate. There's been a lot of fairly open-ended approach to being on council business. Okay, if we're at a meeting, we need to say where we are.
Would you like me to add, the one I do know is Mayor Phil Goff, absent on council business, opening BMX.
Opening the BMX track, perfect.
Okay,
thank you.
We'll note that. And just the question of what defines council business, Democracy Services is looking at that. And Deputy Mayor, you've been leading a body of work in that regard. Anything to add, Deputy Mayor? Nothing?
No, just there's going to be a definition coming forward.
Okay, good. I need a seconder though. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Simpson, thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Okay. If there's anybody wants to register their vote in opposition, just let me know. But we'll move on. Any declarations of interest, members? Now, if you're a Tupunamonga Authority member, you probably thought that we were going to be hearing from the Tupunamonga Authority when we come to possible plan change. I don't think we're going to be hearing from them because the matter is deferred. Yep. So that part of that item, which is from memory item 11, 10? That not item 10 in its entirety, a part of item 10 will be deferred to the 27th of November meeting of the Planning Committee.
Chair, can I just comment and say thank you to yourself and to Mr. Dogood as well for that particular compromise in regards to the view sharp. So thank you so much.
Okay, well, any other declarations of interest on any item on our agenda? Councillor Casey.
Just to say that I've been a member of the Eden Park Community Liaison Group for about the last 10 years, or as long as I've been a councillor. It's not a conflict, it's just a registration of interest.
A registration of interest. Okay, we'll note that. Thank you. Going to the confirmation of the minutes, and I will move confirmation of the minutes. To have a second. Councillor Hills. Thank you. And that's for the meeting last of 2 October. It's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. 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 Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. No petitions this meeting, members. Public input, and you'll see on your agenda that we had a request for public input from the Pam Ewer Community Action Group under 5.2. That they've withdrawn. We might see them again at another meeting, but at this stage they have withdrawn. So that takes us to the 5.1, which is public input from the Auckland Waterfront Consortium regarding a proposal for Auckland's waterfront. And we've got a number of parties here, but I'll ask the principal leaders of the consortium, Michael Sage and Dave Wigmore. Dave, I think you were going to introduce your team and make your submission to head of council today. And welcome to your team.
Tēnā koutou. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to meet with you today. And present an idea which we think will be truly transformational for our city and its people. I'm Dave Wigmore. I chair the Auckland Waterfront Consortium. I'm joined by three others from the consortium: Mike Sage from Simpson Grierson, Richard Goldie to the far left from Peddlethorpe Architects and also a member of the Urban Design Panel, and Alistair White, who is from Planning Focus. Someone who isn't here today but was on the agenda is Bill Loughett. He has another engagement and can't be here. We have a short PowerPoint presentation which explains who makes up the consortium and elements of the proposal. This should take about 10 minutes, and it's intended to answer as many of the questions as we can that have been raised directly with us, but also raised through the media over the last week or two. Hopefully this will leave us with a bit of time to answer any questions from the floor, and we're also able to leave some copies of the media releases and other material which you can digest at your leisure. So I'll now pass over to Mike Sage, who's going to run you through the PowerPoint.
Tēnā koutou. We're here today to ask the Council to enter into an agreement with the consortium and the Crown to test the feasibility of the consortium's proposal that the Bledisloe Wharf and the basin between Bledisloe and Queen's Wharves should be transformed into a breathtakingly and beautiful precinct, with a combination of public spaces giving access to the water's edge, a vibrant mixed residential, commercial and entertainment precinct on Bledisloe Wharf, which we've christened Bledisloe Quarter, and an elegant, beautiful, fully enclosed, sustainable, multi-purpose stadium built to the highest environmental standards and kaitiakitanga principles, straddling the western edge of Bledisloe Wharf, set down into the seabed, and all of this delivered at zero cost to the rate and taxpayer. The stadium would replace Eden Park and Mount Smart Stadium. We've got some slides here that I'm just going to go through very quickly. A lot of this you may have seen before and has been in the media. This shows the 10 members of the Auckland Waterfront Consortium. There are 11 logos up there. HOK in the top right-hand corner are effectively subcontracted to us, and they are international stadium architects based in the States. The key elements of the proposal: this is first and foremost a proposal to redevelop the central section of the Auckland Waterfront. The stadium, however, is the anchor project, delivered, as I said, at zero cost to the ratepayer and funded by the development of Bledisloe Wharf and Eden Park. That's a picture looking from Bayswater back towards the city, showing the new stadium. It's a magnificent design. This is an overhead diagram showing how the new stadium would straddle the western edge of Bledisloe Wharf. It shows Bledisloe Wharf having been redeveloped. It also shows the basin between Queen's and Bledisloe Wharfs, with Marsden Wharf and Captain Cook Wharf removed. And if you look to the right-hand side of Bledisloe Wharf, you'll see there's a finger wharf which has the Toyota car import building on it. That is due for demolition anyway, so that would be removed in the fullness of time. You'll notice there that there's room for a super cruise liner berth at the northern edge of Bledisloe Wharf, and we would see the Queen's Wharf, Bledisloe Wharf basin opened up for ferry traffic, possibly in the future a new ferry terminal in there, and the cruise liners berthing primarily between Prince's and Queen's Wharfs. The outcomes that we're proposing are financially viable. They do enable the various pieces of Auckland's jigsaw to be fitted together. Our stadium problems get fixed. We open up the waterfront. We protect the harbour better than we're doing currently. We provide about room for about 12,000 residents, and all of this adjacent to public transport. And this enables the Ngāti Whātua land at Key Park to be freed up for better, higher value development. And all of this supports the long-term Ports of Auckland plan to eventually move And most of all, this provides a breathtakingly beautiful vista at the front door of Auckland. These are all aspirational goals, but we firmly believe that they are achievable. We are asking for leadership and vision and support from you and from the Crown and from Mana Whenua. This does require, and we believe that we have a carefully planned strategy that will minimise the risk for all parties in this. The key is finding a developer and through a contestable bidding process, which we think will be intensely bid, to construct the stadium, and in return for having to construct the stadium and co-fund some other enabling works, the developer would acquire the development rights over Bledisloe Wharf and the Eden Park site. This is a view from the steps of the stadium which go down to the water's edge looking back towards Quay Street. And you can see how this is very much about public access to Waterfront. The stadium itself would have 50,000 permanent seats, but can be upscaled to about 65 or 70,000 seats, 65,000 being the magic number to host a Rugby World Cup. And it can also be downsized for smaller events. It's an all-weather stadium, it's fully enclosed. It's not just a football stadium, this is a multi-purpose stadium for sports and entertainment events. It's set down into the seabed so that it doesn't create a ginormous visual blot on the landscape, and funded entirely by the conversion of some land to better uses and extracting the value from that in the form of a stadium which the developer has to deliver at its cost and risk. This cross-section gives you an idea of the scale of the stadium. So the top of the goalposts would sit at about seabed level. The back row of seats would sit at street level. There has been a bit of public commentary about tsunami and rising sea levels. If they affect the stadium, they'll be affecting the whole of downtown, including the Britomart rail station. It's not really an issue. This is the view you saw at the beginning. It's from Quay Street looking towards the stadium. Other elements of the project, the Bledisloe Wharf would be developed into a Bledisloe Quarter with new commercial and residential areas. This would revitalise what's currently a dead part of Auckland's downtown area, and would complement the optimal use of Ngāti Whātua's land. Marsden and Captain Cook wharves would be removed, and that would give us a basin ideal for ferry traffic. Eden Park would be repurposed as a mixed residential and commercial area, primarily residential. And that would come to the market after Bledisloe Quarter had been developed so that the market's not flooded. The existing car handling facilities at the port need to be relocated. Cricket needs to be separated from rugby. That is almost in the bag and will probably happen regardless of anything that happens with this project. And this does unlock the potential for other things in the future. I've mentioned the possibility of a new ferry terminal. Bledisloe Wharf could become the premier open space in downtown Auckland. It would have to accommodate a new cruise ship terminal as well, and it would enable new public spaces to be developed in the basin between Prince's and Queen's Wharves. You won't be able to see this, but we can make this available. The key points to take from the timeline for this project is that from the start of the next phase of work to completion of the stadium is roughly a 10-year horizon. The key issues that we want to talk to you about today, firstly, the consortium's proposal needs to be tested during a 12 to 18-month facilitation phase against alternative solutions to transform the waterfront and to provide Auckland with a world-class indoor stadium. And the proposal should be modified to ensure that the needs of all stakeholders are met before any commitment is made. The key feasibility criteria which we think need to be met by this or any other proposal are firstly a design philosophy which is absolutely world-class in terms of aesthetics and functionality. There needs to be a holistic integrated solution to a number of issues confronting Auckland, including stadia, waterfront, housing, public transport and enlivening downtown Auckland. Land must remain in New Zealand ownership, and it's essential that all of this happens at zero cost to the ratepayer and the taxpayer. In other words, that this has to be funded entirely by adding value to public land, by changing its use, and then extracting that value in the form of a stadium and other public amenities. Temperamental clicker. All key stakeholders will have to work closely and collaboratively during the facilitation phase to ensure that all of their needs are identified and can be met. During this period, there would have to be a standstill on other initiatives that might delay or make impossible the implementation of the proposal. Otherwise, we'll just waste public money. The aim is to maximise net returns from the project to the people of Auckland by all of the stakeholders being smart and working together. There's no point starting the facilitation phase with a proposal that hasn't already been carefully thought through, tested and refined with input from key stakeholders. Our proposal ticks these boxes, and we're confident that further feasibility work will confirm that the proposal will fly. If it had a fatal flaw, we think we would have found it by now. We've got the benefit of knowing what hasn't worked in the past. Oval stadia, unroofed stadia, stadia that are not connected to the city, stadia that have to repay their construction costs through operating revenues, stadia that aren't acoustically contained, stadia that might function well but they're enormous, ugly structures, and stadia that aren't immediately adjacent to existing public transport hubs. Our solution addresses all of those issues. If the facilitation phase proves that the proposal is viable, then a preferred developer would be selected through an international competitive bidding process. The preferred developer will be the one that commits to providing the best outcomes for the people of Auckland, and the preferred developer would be required to immediately repay the costs of the facilitation and the developer selection phases. The preferred developer and all key stakeholders will then enter into a contracting phase, at the end of which all of the parties sign formal contracts to proceed with the project. This is a really important point to understand. Neither the council nor any other stakeholder will be locked into this project until it has gone through these first 3 phases, and that will take a total of about 3 years. If the proposal is implemented in the form that we've conceived, then the stadium and the new public spaces in the Bledisloe Queen's Wharf area will have been paid for entirely by the public sharing with the developer the uplift in value which is created by changing the use of Bledisloe Wharf and Eden Park from a car park and from a severely underused stadium into high value residential and commercial land. So this is a simple, elegant solution to funding some key infrastructure. This is a highly effective use of public assets that doesn't divert public expenditure from other priorities like housing, transport and core infrastructure, but which does deliver housing for up to 12,000 people. It does make best use of existing public transport. It does breathe life back into a dead, fenced-off waterfront, and it will be a key contributor to achieving Auckland's goals of being internationally competitive as an attractive place to visit, live, work and invest. Oops, sorry, I've gone too far. This can and it has to be achieved in a way that doesn't damage Ports of Auckland's long-term viability. Our proposal envisages a raft of commercial benefits for Ports of Auckland. There has to be a viable solution to moving the cars off the wharf. This isn't going to require rocket science, and we believe that Aucklanders simply won't tolerate the waterfront being used as a car park any longer than is necessary. The time to start the facilitation phase is now, ideally this year, because if we delay this, the window of opportunity that's currently open to solve Auckland's waterfront and stadium issues in an optimal zero-cost way will shut. If it does, we'll end up with an ugly eyesore on our waterfront for generations to come, and with a city that will have the embarrassment of being unable to host major sporting or entertainment events. In later years, if Aucklanders then decide that these are outcomes they can't live with, they will have to pay to overcome the very problems that could have been avoided by adopting a carefully considered, low-risk, zero-cost strategy back in 2018. History would not judge us kindly if that happened. So why is this urgent? Well, it's not our role to make public announcements about Eden Park's present financial position or the physical state of its facility, but we're making an assumption that our proposal provides the only feasible path forward for the Eden Park Trust. In other words, to swap its existing site in about 10 years' time in return for the right to operate the new facility and to get some life support to stay open for the next 10 years. There's a very real prospect that Eden Park could be forced or could simply choose to sell its number 2 ground. If we deal with the Eden Park site on a piecemeal basis, this will develop all parts of it significantly, and that will reduce the benefits available to Auckland. Ports of Auckland is looking to get consent to build a 6-storey car park on Bledisloe Wharf next year. This would destroy the aesthetics of our waterfront, making an existing eyesore worse. And it's something that we would be ashamed of as Aucklanders. If our proposal were to go ahead anyway, then that car park would have an operational life of about 3 to 4 years, and that would be a terrible waste of money. And we've lost it altogether. Back now. There's already a 10-year time frame to deliver the stadium and transform the waterfront. We think that's long enough already. If we make this 15 or 20 or 30 years, we'll just have a series of compounding and expensive problems. Why have a sunken stadium? It has to be set down into the seabed to avoid a visual barrier. This will give us our Sydney Opera House or our Statue of Liberty moment. Our design is a beautiful one for the stadium. Why are we doing this as a consortium? We're doing this because we are very passionate about our city. We want to create a legacy for our children and our grandchildren, and we have the skills and experience within our consortium to do this. We're not looking to make any net financial gain out of this project. We've conceived it so far, and we've invested about 18 months and about $1 million of our own time and cash to get to this point. However, we're all professional service providers. If we work on this, we'll need to give up other work opportunities, so we'll need to be paid for our time in the normal way. This cost can be met initially by whomever wants to take the initiative to make the project happen. Maybe that's council, maybe it's the Crown, private backers, maybe it's philanthropists, maybe it's a combination. But this will be repaid upfront by the preferred developer. Effectively, this represents a low-risk loan to the project that's drip-fed over a 2 to 2.5 year period against an agreed work program. It is then repaid in full with interest. The consortium will be structured so that it cannot make anything out of the project except the fees that pay for our time. 100% of the value created within this project above the developer's margin will be captured by the people of Auckland.
Thank you, Mike. We believe this is a once-in-a-lifetime or a generation opportunity to make a significant difference to our city. For the people who live here, the people who visit, for our children, our grandchildren and beyond. Delivery of the project will take courage. There is both an opportunity and a need for Council to demonstrate the required courage and take a leadership role, and we ask you to do just that. We're not asking you to approve the waterfront development or construction of a waterfront stadium. We are asking you to recognise this is the best and most widely supported proposal that anyone has ever put up so far to transform the waterfront and resolve Auckland's stadium issues. We are asking for your support to test this through the next phase of detailed feasibility assessment, and we want to start now. We will have time now for some questions, but before we leap into that, I just wonder whether Richard Goldie would like to talk to the model which he's brought in.
Well, kia ora, Dave. There's a lot of good stuff in Mike and Dave's information that he's provided, but we received this model, we'd been working over the weekend yesterday, and we are genuinely excited. And we have to be, because this is the most important piece of our local geography. This has to be world-class. It has to be something we remember. It has to be something our visitors remember. It has to be something our children are proud of. And my God, we are. So look, if you've got a moment, please come and have a quick look at the model up close. If you've got time, crouch down and have a look at what it looks like in the water. It reflects. I'm biased, but it's beautiful.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Alistair, anything to add?
No, thanks.
You're handling the planning area. Okay, we'll take some questions, members. Initially, Councillor Newman, please.
Thank you. Does the stadium development take into account the Port Companies Act and the statutory limit on the ability of people like us to persuade the investment direction of port companies?
I might deal with that. This project is going to require some legislation to get through, probably involving the Port and Eden Park Trust.
So you're anticipating with this that there would need to be an extinguishment of the property rights at Eden Park as well?
Eden Park Trust would essentially hand over its site in return for the operating rights over the new stadium. And some, we'd expect the project would also have to fund Eden Park's life support to keep it running until the new stadium was ready.
You made the comment, quote, almost in the bag, end quote, in relation to cricket and rugby and the decoupling of that. Can you explain, can you elaborate what you mean by almost in the bag?
We're not involved in any initiative to move cricket to Western Springs, so we know what we read in the media about that. But we are making an assumption that cricket will eventually find a new home at Western Springs, and that's an important enabler for this project.
Okay, my final question. So I represent Manurewa and Papakura, and the Ports of Auckland provides an important source of employment for my blue-collar constituents. So can you help me, what is the message that I need to give to the men and women that I represent that actually under this vision here, they're probably, I don't see a role for them, I don't see their jobs here. So what is the message that I give back to my constituents as I embrace your vision to effectively extinguish their employment?
That's a great question. I think the key point here is that the port should not be left any worse off than through this project, and the critical element to that is that any money that is associated with the land transfer associated with Bledisloe Wharf would allow them to continue port operations more efficiently on either their current site or alternative sites.
What alternate sites?
We're obviously in the same discussions as, and we're aware of the discussions that are going on around alternate sites. We've suggested only Hunga as an option. There's intensification of the current port land. There's obviously the discussions around Whangarei or Northport and Tauranga.
My constituents can't commute to and from Whangarei.
I understand.
Is there a message for them?
The key is that there will be jobs for people, and well, wherever the port is able to best find its logistical home.
It's not for yours.
It's not
So
my
just on that front of, to remind ourselves of the Port Future Study, it identified a possible location, Firth of Thames, a possible location, Manukau. It wasn't a precise location. Further work to be undertaken, and subsequent to that, the government has initiated the Upper North Island supply chain strategy work. As yet, this council has not been approached, at least on the political side, of input into that. We expect that approach to be forthcoming. We'll be discussing that, I think, at our next meeting on the 27th. And I understand that a body of work is imminent in the new year, February, March, out of that group.
Well, thank you, Chair, for the explanation. I'm just wanting to find out where my constituents are going to work.
Yep, no, it's a fair enough question, and I think you're referring not so much to those employed at the port, but all the post-import car handling that's in South Auckland. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, I think there's a laundry list, but I won't.
Okay, we won't do the laundry list.
I think there is another point. Sorry, there is another point here, which is that this is a 10-year or 10-year plus building project, which will require significant labour to deliver, and that shouldn't be lost on the people of your constituency or Auckland.
Thank you, Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for obviously lots of the proposal is exciting and creating a lot of energy, but there's obviously a lot of questions, and when we met with you last week I asked you quite a large number of questions, but I guess some of my main concerns are, and you've mentioned Ngāti Whātua in here, and you've mentioned that you'd need leadership and support from mana whenua, but I'm a little bit concerned still that you didn't wait to put this out before you were able to properly engage with Ngāti Whātua or any of the local iwi, and so how is when something so significant that involves land owned or interests in land from iwi, but also such significant waterfront and the effects on the environment. So what are your movements on Mana Whenua?
We have provided a package of information about this project to Ngāti Whātua and have reached out to them several times, inviting them to a briefing on this. They've declined, and we understand that the reason for that is that they don't want to invest time in this until they know that the project has the support of council.
Certainly.
So we respect that position. It does put us in a position where we can only talk from our own knowledge base about the effect that we think this will have on Ngāti Whātua, and the short version of that is that we think there are only upsides and no downsides in this for Ngāti Whātua.
Chair.
And
Yeah, first.
Well done. Councillor Hills.
the other question is the sort of, and we discussed it the other day, but the kind of continued cost-neutral approach, or no cost to ratepayers or taxpayers on such valuable, mostly public land. How I'm still not 100% clear on how that claim can continually be pushed out.
So to I guess put this in the perspective of what the current use of that land is and what its value is now to the people of Auckland, it's a car park. And it's a very industrial use, and the transformation of that into something better is always in its future. But what we're doing is bringing that future forward and enabling that development to occur in nearer time than a 30-year time horizon that Ports of Auckland would be proposing under their current plan. And that enables the uplift in value, the immediate uplift in value, which enables the no cost to ratepayer and taxpayer.
Thank you, Councillor Hills. Member Namani.
Kia ora. Probably just to extend on the questions that were asked by Councillor Hill. I'm interested in how, rather than specifically mentioning any one iwi, knowing that there are multiple mana whenua interests on the waterfront,
Yes.
I'm interested in how you perceive a partnership with mana whenua were you to have one. Because I do acknowledge there's a consortium here that doesn't have mana whenua in it. So I'm interested in your perception of the type of relationship you would have were you to go forward with this.
I think it's critical that all stakeholders are brought into the tent, for want of a better description, and that includes Crown, Council, Port, Eden Park Trust Board and mana whenua. And as part of that discussion, there needs to be a collaborative approach from all parties, including mana whenua, in terms of how to best extract outcomes that support everyone's needs. And we think, based on the work we've done, that there are win-win solutions and outcomes for all of the stakeholders who come into the tent.
Do you see that relationship with mana whenua as anything different than a stakeholder, given the live historical issues?
The nature of the description of stakeholder all have different levels of influence and concern in terms of what we're proposing. And the key issue here is that the issues need to be put on the table so that we understand what those are, and we work with mana whenua and the other stakeholders to deliver outcomes which work for all.
Yeah, I mean, I have an initial concern that there isn't an acknowledgement of the treaty partnership that exists in relation to the foreshore and seabed, and that we're not a stakeholder as mana whenua generally. Not understanding that does concern me. Thank you.
We do understand that. We do understand and appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Namani. Councillor Casey.
I've got a couple of questions. The last Waterfront Stadium debate took place in the Auckland Town Hall pre-Rugby World Cup, and then we had the recent debacle over the PricewaterhouseCoopers report. My first question is, have you seen that report?
No, we haven't. We know a little bit about it through our conversations with council officers, but at no time have we seen that report. We started this process well in advance of any knowledge of the PricewaterhouseCoopers report. We started on this in about April, May 2017. The fact that the PwC report was released and is not really an issue for us. We've been working and going forward on the basis that our proposal is completely independent of that. There will be some learnings from that report which will be of value to us, and we'd like to understand some of the material that sits within that report, and perhaps that might add value to what we're presenting. But for current purposes, we have done things entirely exclusive of that.
So just a follow-on question to that, at what stage do the people of Auckland get a say in what happens at the waterfront through your proposal?
Well, the key issue here, and I think this is part of the reason for wanting to talk to you, is that we've presented an idea to the people through a media release that's engaged the public and has raised interest, and we're hoping that that will continue in a positive way, and that in the planning process and the process which we fully expect would take the normal course of any resource management activity on the waterfront, would require public involvement and discussion. And we would encourage that. We don't believe that this is absolutely the perfect answer. It's an answer which needs to be massaged around stakeholder requirements, including the public.
Okay, thank you for that answer. My third question and final one, but I might have more. As the councillor for Albert Eden Roskill, I've had a long-term interest in Eden Park, and you've been very light today on your proposal. Presumably you've got a business case and a blueprint for the development, and you mentioned 12,000 houses. Where are they going?
We've talked about accommodation for a total of about 12,000 residents across Bledisloe Quarter and Eden Park.
Can you just talk about Eden Park? Tell me as much as you know, as much as you can.
I can probably do that. You do that. The feasibility that we've run on Eden Park has been based around a development at a similar level of intensity of development as would occur in Wynyard Quarter, or what we're proposing for Bledisloe Quarter. The types of uses that we would expect to go in there are largely residential and possibly retirement, and there may be some need for retail activities, including a supermarket, but they will be low scale, and there would be a need for open space. There is also an opportunity to create some connectivity with the Kingsland railway station, and using part of the land within the basement of any development, car parking that would facilitate park and ride from Kingsland.
Have you seen previous proposals issued by Eden Park?
No, we haven't considered.
There? So you haven't had that type of negotiation with them?
No, we've had an initial discussion with their chair and briefed him on our proposal, and I think it's fair to say that he was being appropriately commercially sensitive to firstly maintaining his role as needing to maintain a viable Eden Park for the next 10 years, but he also, I think, understood...
For the next 10 years? Is that what he said?
Yes.
Are you paraphrasing, or he said?
No, he said. And that we felt that this was an opportunity for him to move his issues into a brand new opportunity which would be significantly better than what he is currently faced with.
So final question, on that list of stakeholders, you mentioned the Crown once today, and you mentioned the Council, where you're here today.
Yes.
It's the first I've heard of it. What negotiations to date have you had with the Crown, and what's their view on all of this? Because they're an important stakeholder.
We have had one meeting with Minister Shane Jones. We have a meeting coming up with Minister Grant Robertson wearing his Minister of Sport hat. Our understanding of the Crown's current position is that they see this as an Auckland issue, which the Council needs to take the lead on, but that they are sympathetic to our view that this is a project of national significance, which the Crown needs to support also.
Final question on Eden Park. Are you demolishing it?
The current proposal is that we would, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I first want to say thank you for coming and speaking with us, because the only knowledge I've had about this is via the media, and so I appreciate what you've done, Mr. Chair, in bringing them to the table so we get a bit of understanding. There are a lot of large moving parts that will require you to deliver even the first little bit of what you want to do. So my questions are around, and you've sort of answered them, I think, and come with have you spoken to the Eden Park Trust Board? Have you spoken to RFA Board? That's my first, and I was going to ask the Crown, but Councillor Casey's asked that. Have you spoken to either of those two boards?
Yes, we have, and also ATEED. So we have a very good understanding from within the council family of what their needs are, and there's been widespread, very strong support for the proposal. So in terms of that, yes, we think we've ticked those boxes. Yes.
That's very interesting. And my second question is, look, to build it is one thing, to operate it is another. So you've talked about a funding model that potentially has no cost to the taxpayer or the ratepayer. I think we just need to look at the words really around that because, people of Auckland own the land for a start. But I'm not sure of too many stadiums around the world that actually make any money. So is your consortium looking at build it and handing it to somebody to run? And if that's the case, who are you handing it to?
No, so at the moment, the suggestion is that the operator would be a reconstituted Eden Park Trust Board to operate a national stadium, which is not just a sports stadium, it's a multi-purpose stadium. The investigations that we've undertaken so far, and there's lots more work to be done, is that it is, will be cash flow positive. The key issue being that it isn't required to repay its capital cost, and there will be no debt attached to the development at all.
That's the funny one. Can you tell me, I'm not a stadium specialist, can you tell me of any other stadiums around the world that are below ground or within?
Yeah, I think Richard's.
We're not aware of any ones that are in a location like this. However, the Louvre, which houses significantly important treasures, is building in Abu Dhabi now in the sea. We know this can be done, technically.
Thank you.
Quite a bit of the Netherlands is below sea level. They know about this technology. Member Henare.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Can I first of all say that I'm absolute major supporter of your idea. I think it's absolutely fantastic and we should do it tomorrow. However, just on the stakeholder issue, I don't think you understand that we're not like any other stakeholder. There's a special relationship. And I would have thought, even though Ngāti Whātua have said, well, we're not making any yes or no's at this stage, I would have thought you would have included a statement that was all-encompassing of the special treaty relationship, just to, even in terms of a marketing strategy, but you failed there. Can I ask about, I suppose it's along the lines of Councillor Newman's when he was concerned about his constituents. I'm concerned about Mātāwaka, which is urban Māori, and the issue of procurement. And I know you most probably will come back with a there's just jobs for everybody. What's your view on a particular procurement attitude of saying, right, we're going to have 15% Māori working on the site, regardless of the backlash?
We've taken advice from within our consortium group around the best way to facilitate the opportunity with mana whenua, and to do it in a way which is entirely respectful of the cultural position from which they're coming from, and also their obvious rights under the Treaty of Waitangi and the harbour and seabed issues. We are also very keen to make sure that what we do is entirely complementary with that. We do not want to offend in any way mana whenua, and but we do see some massive opportunities, and one of those opportunities is in procurement around construction, around long-term operational management. All of those things are elements that can be incorporated into the project over time. One of the key offers that we think that we can deliver into the project is the opportunity for a waterfront cultural centre, which is available for Mana Whenua to operate and create a tourism attraction from. There are other activities which we believe will be tightly linked to Mana Whenua as distinct from sport or other entertainment opportunities, and those can be incorporated into the project as we move forward.
I'm over the moon about the cultural centre build because it's one of my points, so I don't have to ask that, so thank you very much. I suppose the last question, these things cost a hell of a lot of money not only to build, but to run. What, Eden Park is available, what? It's open about 30, 40 days a year. Do you envisage this beautiful thing on our waterfront open 365 days a year? With all, no, I'm not talking about, you know, rugby every day, but I'm talking about music festivals, I'm talking about all sorts of things, because I think if you want it to be financially viable and pay for itself somehow, then it's going to have to be open 365 days a year.
That's absolutely correct. And so that doesn't mean that the public are in there 365 days. There's set-up times and things like that that go with major events and things like that. But there's also ancillary activities that we think can be incorporated within the project. We've talked about, but haven't discussed with Kelly Tarleton, the opportunity to come into the basement of this project and be relocate from their current location. Where there's the opportunity, as we mentioned, of a cultural centre. There's the opportunity of other activities that would, including conference and other things that could be incorporated within the project. There's the opportunity perhaps to look at sports and stadium tours, which are really common in places like the MCG run stadium tours and make real money out of that. So those are ideas that are still developing. There are plenty of ways of utilising the stadium up to 240 plus days a year, but it's a matter of how you manage that.
If I can just add, that it must be remembered that this would be Auckland's only large format indoor facility for a city which is going to be 2 million plus by the time this is completed. So we think the only problem will be, does it provide enough capacity?
Just one final question. In the consortium now and in going forward, what Māori representation do you envisage on the upper level of, you know, like a board, the consortium, the developer?
From the outset, we felt that having Mana Whenua representation within the consortium would be our preferred option. We're obviously needing to engage with the right people to enable that. At this stage, because of their reluctance to, or certainly Ngāti Whātua's reluctance to speak to us until Council have given some clear direction, we've been held back from having that conversation.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Just question of mine, probably it's for you, Richard, as architect. So we've just, this committee's been recently briefed on the downtown program from 4 different landscape architects. And one of the very first things that a landscape architect or an architect does is they undertake a landscape analysis. You'll be very familiar with that. They don't go to object, they don't just start to design the building or the object before they've understood the landscape. So I guess I'm really intrigued as to how this was led. Was it led by object or was it led by an understanding of the waterfront? So the footprint of this is only half the waterfront. It doesn't include the waterfront port activity area of going further towards Ferguson. So can you just take us through the landscape and architect's process on how you arrived at this location?
Certainly, thank you. We this process started when the Rugby World Cup stadium was proposed, and that sat in the basin between Queen's Wharf and Bledisloe Wharf. Then one of our consortium members, Phil O'Reilly, not the business roundtable Phil O'Reilly, a much more fun guy called Phil O'Reilly as well, proposed, and you saw this, someone with Photoshop sunk the thing down into the harbour. And at about the same time, Phil got in touch with Dave, and Dave got in touch with people he knew. And that was a really profoundly important move. So what we started by doing, and it was a typical process, and sort of, so we're going sort of backwards to the start, was exactly that. We knew that these were the starting points. We knew what the opportunities were. We knew that, and one of the things the consortium is very keen to do is not to disrupt. Obviously, the changing of the car operations is disruptive to a point, but not to wholesale disrupt the port operations. So we're within a limited footprint. So we felt that the obvious thing was Bledisloe Wharf, and there's a very simple thing to understand about Bledisloe Wharf, and you see it in the model. Britomart Point was demolished fundamentally to create a lot of the flat area we have in the downtown. And we have a drawing where we track the waterfront, and it pokes out more or less where you see that triangular form in the model there. And so we felt that that was a natural enclosure to one end of the city anyway. There was a university professor called John Dixon who spoke about the poetics of how the headlands work and then the bays and the communities nestle in between. So we always felt that the right thing to do right from the start of the city was almost to bookend the city here by reimagining Britomart Point as that turning point. So when the time comes that we redevelop the total ports when they do move, we turn around the headland and we go again. But we love the idea that this starts at one end and we have Wynyard Quarter at the other. And you've heard Wynyard Quarter mentioned, and that is the benchmark that we use for density and height and all those sorts of good things. Because we know that that's been gone through a thorough process by council and we get there. So that in a roundabout way, that's how we knew what the bookends of the city were, and of course they would be connected by a highly vibrant Quay Street and then going back into the city from there. What we did do early on was we modelled with our HOK friends the seating in the stadium, because of course stadium performance is all about the sight lines between the pitch and the seats, and so all we had was the bit that was effectively up to the top of the water. What we then did was we just very simply took the form that we took out of that 3D model and lifted it, and that sort of became the genesis of the roof, if you like. But what we did also at the same time, we took that model and we started it off in the basin between Queen's and Bledisloe, where it was shown the original World Cup, and we started moving it around. And we took key points within our 3D model and looked across at where it was and how it was working. And it was very evident that the position that you see today was the one that really, really worked. And if you think about it in sort of simple retail terms, it's the anchor of the Bledisloe development. It draws people out to the ends, out to the water's edge, and it allows all of the development to happen between. So it was we've been working on this for 18 months, obviously not 18 months fully of design, otherwise my practice would have gone out of business. But we've done a lot of that, and interestingly we met with Ludo Campbell-Reid from the Auckland Design Office yesterday, and curiously enough, in the work they did way back then, they almost landed on the same position. So it's always wonderful to have informal peer review, if you like, of the kind of decisions that you've come to.
So how does that, that's that part of the waterfront. So just in terms of, did you test that location then against other locations as the PwC pre-feasibility report for a future stadium did?
We are not obviously party to the PwC report, however, everyone knows sort of what the locations possibly were. The critical thing with our proposal, and this is a moment in history, you won't often hear architects talk like this, but the business of this has to be right in order to deliver the stadium at no cost to the ratepayer and the taxpayer. And there is no other position in the city that we're aware of that can support the scale of development alongside it that delivers that promise.
Okay, and how do you respond to the question that, and I think, remember Hinare commenced this discussion, stadiums, this is an arena stadium, so it's not about the corporate facilities or the bungee jumping or the golf in the middle, that's all just adds to your bottom line. the core activity is an arena event. That's why you have a stadium. And the most successful stadiums in the world probably operate arena events at maybe 65, 70 days a year. And yet there's lead-in time on that, and then breakdown of the event. And yours is a roofed, totally climate-controlled, inward-facing environment, and you've got this magnificent harbour right on your edge. Why there when your whole focus is inward and you've controlled that environment to a point, you have to control that environment to a point where you're shutting out every bit of context? And that just fascinates me, what your answer is to that.
Okay, that's a good question. The reality is that for the 2 hours you spend in the stadium, you will spend 6 in the city. So, and even if you're not going to an event, then one of the real benefits of sinking this thing down, and you've seen that beautiful image of the steps, someone referred to them as GATs, is the sense that unlike an above-ground stadium, and this is one of the great challenges with the key park option, these things are 60 to 80 metres high. They don't generally have very nice edges around them. They can dress them up as you like, but mostly they're dead. They're not a good urban design proposition. So dropping this thing down and then allowing us to have a very vibrant, I call it a urban beach. Our offices aren't that far from here, but I can see myself in the summer wandering down there and frankly swimming off there. I'd love to see the Cross Harbour swim start and finish here. So I think this is much more, yes, the stadium and what happens inside it is critical, but the edge is really all about the everyday 24-hour public access, and I think that's something that we really need to get our heads around.
Okay, look, one final question from me about the process that we need to engage in to pick up on this idea and other ideas. We've had Archimedia and we'll have a lot of others as well. What do you think the council is not doing at the moment? And I'm really inviting you to be quite frank here. We don't know all the answers and don't pretend to. What do you think the process is for Auckland, and I don't mean just the council or the government, but for Auckland to have a discussion about its post-port waterfront? What is the process that you would recommend? And how would you see this proposal and other proposals, Archimedia's and others, to be tested in that process?
What we're suggesting here is that we need to embark on a facilitation phase, which is another way of saying we need to do detailed feasibility planning around this project. One of the key elements of that is that it has to be a very, very collaborative process. So we would see council and all of the members of the council family literally sitting around a table with us, and that would include Ports of Auckland as a critically impacted stakeholder here. It would include Mana Whenua, as we've discussed before. It would include Eden Park Trust. We need to start with an idea that looks like it ticks all of the boxes. We don't want to start with a dud. We think this does tick all the boxes, but then we need to be prepared to stress test it and change it, and if it doesn't work, to get rid of it. We need to, as professional firms, and all of the consortium members are professional firms, we've got our own professional reputations on the line here, and as Aucklanders we want to deliver something that really works, not something that is a failure. So we want to bring everyone together who's got something to contribute to this, work quickly, collaboratively, bring all of the benefit of the IP that's been developed in the past about other proposals, both in Auckland and elsewhere, into a single bucket, and out of that synthesise the best idea. And until we've got that right, there shouldn't be any commitment by anyone to go ahead with this. But what we are saying is that if we delay getting into this facilitation phase, we will have big problems further down the track, and we need to start now.
Thank you. Councillor Filipina?
Thank you, Chair. And I'm just going to, Mike, firstly, I'm going to stay away from Eden Park because this is Councillor Casey's first day back, and I don't want to upset her. So I'm going to stay away from Eden Park. But Mike, in your opening comments, you mentioned the feasibility or the facilitation phase, right? The feasibility plan. And you said that there's no cost. On your timeline on slide 15, it's got December 2018. Now, no cost to council in regards to the feasibility? I know there won't be any in regards to the facilitation, but are you saying that in regards to a feasibility stage or plan, there's going to be no cost to council?
Yeah, to enable this to work, we need to get into the facilitation phase, which is where we test the idea and make sure that it works. And then the next phase is the developer selection phase. The costs of those two phases will need to be covered by someone. That may be council, that may be the Crown, it may be private backers, it may be philanthropists, it could be a combination. But the very first thing that the preferred developer will have to do in order to get preferred developer status and to then carry forward into the contracting phase is to refund those costs. So that's why we describe them as a short-term loan to the project, which will be repaid with interest. We think it's philosophically probably the right thing for the public to provide that short-term loan, but to be perfectly honest, it doesn't really matter where it comes from. It will be repaid, and that's how we get back to zero cost.
And I think that's the story that needs, well, not story, but those are the facts that need to be at least told. Because when you hear there's no cost to council, and people are just going to leave that in their heads and then say, well, hold on, we may have to pay X amount to assist with the feasibility. So, you know, I mean, I'm just saying that needs to be put clear. I've got another, not unless you want to comment, I've got another question. I've got two more.
If I may, there are three components to the cost that we need to look at here. The smallest by far is how will the facilitation phase and the developer selection phase be funded, and it is through the short-term loan that will need to come from somewhere. The work won't do itself. The second cost issue that's raised is what if the stadium costs more than anyone expects, to which the very simple answer is that's the developer's problem. The third financial question that is asked is, will the stadium as a debt-free operating entity be able to cover its depreciation and its operating costs? And this is one of the things that needs to be tested during the facilitation phase, but we believe the answer is very firmly yes. Okay, and we've got, Chair, there's 15 months, because really that's the only stage I'm interested in. I'm not interested in what happens after that, because we don't know, because within 3 years, as you've said in slide 17, it may not go ahead. So you've got 15 months to complete that facilitation phase, and then you move into the phases that you mentioned on slide 17. So my question is, 15 months, I mean, that seems like a very short time, but that's the date you've got it, March 2020. What happens, because you said, look, if we don't get this in early, it's not going to happen. So post-March 2020, if it's not done, what happens there? Do we... The way that we're suggesting that the facilitation phase be run, and this would be captured in an agreement with the consortium, is that there's an agreed timetable and work program, which is basically aimed at ensuring that if there are fundamental problems, they're flushed out early and the project is canned. Or if we're a little bit more optimistic, and we do take a glass half full approach to this, we're really excited about this. But if we take a more optimistic view, then what we'll be doing is we'll be flushing to the surface any significant modifications that need to be made. But the most important thing to take from that is that if we can get all the key parties sitting around the table collaborating, we will find out quickly if we need to make significant changes or to can this, and the project should stop then before any money is wasted going further.
Can I just add, please, coming from and again, here comes the architect. When we do projects, we always love to have a goal. And the goal at this at 2030-31 is Rugby World Cup and Commonwealth Games. And so it's fantastic to kind of have that bookend, and we work back from there, and hence the timeline. Yeah, and Chair, I've got no issues in regards. I've got one more, and the question is to you, Chair. Around December 2018, around the facilitation phase, when will a decision be made by Council whether we will be signing up as part of that facilitation phase and sign the agreement? When will that decision be made?
So look, we've had no discussions at all.
No, I
on
understand that.
Yep, I'll arrive at.
Yep.
So members, at our next meeting on the 27th, we're considering our refresh of the City Centre Master Plan. And as you heard at our workshop, one of the questions is how do we treat with the waterfront land currently occupied by the operational activities of the port? So how do we treat with that land? Do we assume, well, the Port Future Study assumes at some time it will be moving, and it suggests that it needs to move in full, not in part. If you remember, the decoupling of the two parts of the port are not recommended. That would weaken the value entirely of the port. So I think at our next meeting on the 27th, we've had our workshop on the City Centre Master Plan. I've asked our staff to bring some options on how we might explore the waterfront land. That's as much as I can offer at this stage. We don't have an agreement in front of us, and it would be entirely premature for me to answer on behalf of the council how we might approach that.
I think it was more about a discussion that we need to have, is the question I've asked. Gentlemen, thank you.
Could I just add to that, and it might help you in terms of the timing issue and the overlap in terms of what you're looking to do from a waterfront planning perspective. We see what we're trying to do as running in parallel with that, not in competition with it. And the key point is that we would want to be assisting that process, not hindering it. So running in parallel is really important, and even dovetailing through the process. So what I would expect if all things go according to plan, that timeline is all consistent with what you're looking to achieve in terms of your own objectives.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got quite a few councillors that want to ask questions now. It's a bigger batting list. So Councillor, I'll run the names through. Councillors Cooper, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Clough, Councillor Simpson again, Councillor Newman again, Councillor Bartley, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Casey again, Councillor Lee. I think I'll go to those that that haven't asked a question. I'll run through those councillors first. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, and I do admire you for taking this on. It's a mammoth project. I wanted to go off the back of Councillor Filipaina's conversation, because we've heard originally, and everybody says, isn't that great, no cost to council, but we've subsequently heard, well, it might be a $4 million loan, something like that. I guess if this doesn't go ahead, is that underwritten that we still get that paid back?
No.
So it would be a risk to us, and no underwriting.
It's a risk to whoever provides the short-term local project.
I asked that because we're already owed money by Eden Park, and we also underwrite there, so would be in for $50, $60 million. So that's why I ask it.
Yeah, that's why it is important to be careful to have a work program which will flush problems to the surface.
So it's not guaranteed that it's of no cost.
Yes, however, Auckland is going to need a stadium solution at some point.
That's right.
This project is going to has generated a lot of valuable IP already.
We've seen quite a few ideas for stadiums, but
captured and delivered to the council.
Yeah, but I'm just speaking to the fact that we cannot say at this point categorically that it's no cost to council.
Sorry, can I just add to that? That we're not necessarily saying that this has to be council funded. In fact, we're quite open with the idea that this can be funded from numerous sources, or a single private investor, or so this if we're very confident that we can secure that funding from other sources. We'd prefer that council and Crown are participants in that, because that's a key element of having a transparent outcome which has buy-in from all parties, but it's not critical.
Okay, and just so that segues nicely into when you said the governance would be a reconstituted Eden Park, and I just ask you to really look at that, because at the moment we're really, sunk a lot of money and a lot of risk into Eden Park, which we don't own, and we don't have any governance. We're told we need to keep putting money in, but we don't have any governance role. So I'd really ask you to look at that, and mana whenua.
So to answer that, to answer the Eden Park Trust Board question, we see that their reconstituted structure. The first key point is that the stadium would be owned by the Crown or the council as a standalone entity, and perhaps with Eden Park Trust Board having a shareholding as a result of their contribution of capital in the process. Well, they have land.
Don't know if they'll have any left.
They'll have,
paid their
they'll
loans.
have, well, they have land which is of value to the project, so that's how that translates.
Okay, so just the last question through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of, you talked about, oh, this could be a conference centre. Have you spoken to, given that council are a significant owner of conference facilities, have you talked to anybody in RFA about that, or Sky City? Because, you know, having a look at an overall conventions venue strategy, you know, I'd hate to see it undermining other, you know, especially council, which generates money to actually, you know, for operations for our own facilities.
We've been very careful to canvass ATEED and RFA and ensure that everything that we're doing is supported by them, and that they have been incredibly supportive of the project, and their view to us is that there is an incredible amount of content that Auckland's already missing out on that needs a facility like this.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, you can take me off the list. She asked my question.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Yeah, very briefly. So Councillor Filipaina asked most of them except one. So, gentlemen, Tamaki Makaurau Place desired by many, and this site is definitely desired by many. As Councillor Newman said, as a port structure, it employs a lot of people, directly and indirectly. You know, 3,500, 4,000 in the south. Plus, we've had Archimedia's presentation. Looks very nice. Your model's beautiful, and I admire your vision and your stance. Why should us and/or the government take precedence of your desires over the other two or more?
I think it's important that we understand that this is not the final product. There will be, whatever happens in this process will be intuitive and informed by stakeholders, including the public. So if there are other options that need to be thought about, then we're open to those discussions, and we're open to measuring our proposal against those options. We believe this is the best site for this proposal, given the mandate of low visual impact from the harbour to the city, the need to complete a covered stadium that is multi-purpose. That's at no cost to the rate and taxpayer. And with that sort of, I guess, starting point, we believe this is the only site in Auckland that can achieve that.
Thank you. Councillor Clough.
Yeah, thank you. I've got several questions. One of them is a question which, first one, which will possibly answer Councillor Filipaina's question and what Councillor Darby was saying. So, gentlemen, are you aware we've just done the long-term plan, which is a 10-year plan, but it's 3 years. So the next long-term plan is going to be 2021, which in effect is when we're going to look at the stadium issue. Because the port study up at North Island Port Study will have been in by then. Nothing will happen to that until an election campaign in 2020, when the people decide whether regional development and potential moving of aspects of our port to Northland or wherever. And then, of course, we have our own waterfront master plan. So you're aware that it would not be till 2021 that we'd be wanting to look at business cases for your proposition, which I think is beautiful. Ngāti Whātua's proposition and Eden Park itself. Are you aware that it wouldn't be till 2021? You're asking us to do something way earlier than we would think is chronologically sensible.
I think what we're suggesting is that there's work that needs to be done before 2021 to enable really robust decisions to be made. And I think the timeline that we're proposing roughly gets us, with the 3 years that we're suggesting, to, in that order, to be ready to be looking at contracting with an international developer or funder for the project. So I don't think we're necessarily out of step with what you're suggesting from a timing perspective, but we do need to start this feasibility testing now, because if we leave it till 2021, we will miss the 2030 Com Games opportunity and the Rugby World Cup opportunity in 2031.
And there are other issues which create a degree of urgency here. The Ports of Auckland proposal to build a car park on Bledisloe Wharf is something that we think should be revisited immediately. And Eden Park's current position is, we believe, from what we see in the media, fairly desperate.
So I'm just looking at your press release where you know, you've mentioned some names, and I mean, the sports-loving ex-Prime Minister, we understand why she doesn't. She would like to have Eden Park closed down, but you've got then some rugby players, and then you've got New Zealand Rugby League, the NRL, New Zealand Football, not New Zealand Rugby, interesting, but when was the last time New Zealand Rugby League, the NRL, or New Zealand Football filled a stadium with any more than 30,000 people?
One of the design elements that we believe should be built into this is the ability to scale the stadium down so that when it has a crowd of, say, 20 or 25,000, it doesn't look like it's being played in a half-empty stadium. The beauty of having a blank sheet of paper and the ability to design a really modern facility is that we can do things like that, whereas you can't do that when you try and retrofit an existing facility.
Okay. Another practical thing is it's a rectangular stadium. How do you put a running track for Commonwealth Games, which would be used for a week, inside of a rectangular stadium?
We didn't know the answer to that question until we went and saw Peter McSkimmon from Sport NZ. And he said that, by the way, do you recall Glasgow Commonwealth Games? That track was actually elevated into the up from the playing field to enable a track to fit within the seating. So that is a model which has been done before, and we think can be done here. The person who was heavily involved in that particular event actually works for ATED now, so that information is available to council, and we're delighted to be able to refer to that.
Yeah. Okay.
One more.
So, yeah, no, I've got a few. I'm allowed them.
Okay, I
Yep.
need to have one more because I've still got about 4 other councillors.
Okay, I'll wrap them all into one then. So, obviously, in reality, only New Zealand Rugby can fill a stadium with 50 or 60,000, and or a Dell or something like that. There was an article this morning in the Herald, quite interesting, talking about the way the entertainment world is moving, and obviously sending out the portents that, hey, building something massive, is that the way to go? So that's part of the question. The other one is, again, the free stadium. I don't know what the definition of free is, but it's certainly not by definition of when you say it won't cost us anything. So if we're luring New Zealand Football away from, from North Harbour, that's lowering income there. If we're luring League away from Mount Smart, that's income we're losing there. Just generally RFA would be losing right across the board, and we're undermining our other stadiums. Can you just comment on that and how that's a good thing for us?
Well, I think that the first thing is that RFA have been incredibly supportive of what we're proposing. They see it as a significant solution to their problems rather than creating lots more. The repurposing of Mount Smart and the North Harbour Stadium are all part of the mix, and that'll be a conversation that needs to be developed through the consultation process that we're about to advance into. The ability for this stadium to serve multi-purpose activities, the scale of it is very consistent with what's happening internationally. So we don't believe that it's out of step. It's certainly, the 50,000 seat target has been one that's been used universally around Auckland for other stadia studies, so we believe that it's a consistently accepted scale that's important. And the ability to upscale for a Rugby World Cup event is also important.
Okay. Then last question, sorry Chair, I'm going to get on with it. We believe there is strong public sentiment in favour of a waterfront stadium. What do you base that on? I mean, I work around in the arts world quite a bit. I'm not really sure there's a hell of a lot of support for a big flash stadium that's going to take a lot of resources away from other areas of our, what we hope is an increasingly sophisticated city. So where do you get that idea that people think it's a good idea?
I'm not sure that it's taking anything away from other areas of the city. I think it's contributing something else that's missing from the city. But in terms of the question of public support, we certainly need to do some polling to fully understand the level of sentiment, and we are actively asking for that to be undertaken, and we will be looking to fund that shortly. So that is something that we do need to do and do properly. but the anecdotal feedback that we've had has been incredibly strong. So we're not feeling at all uncomfortable about that level of support.
Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. Apologies, I missed your presentation. I'm the councillor that covers the Onehunga area, and there was quite an uproar in my community when your press release came out. That's because we have plans and aspirations for developing the Onehunga Wharf area. Those plans and aspirations do not include the cars being moved from the downtown site to Onehunga. So could you please clarify where you think the cars should be moved to from the downtown site and why? Thank you.
The short answer is that we don't know, and this is one of the things that needs to be tested during the facilitation phase. However, to go back to something that I said earlier, we wouldn't come to you with this vision unless we thought that there were ways of solving issues. In this case, what happens to Ports of Auckland's car import and bulk freight non-containerised operations, because they would need to shift off 3 wharves. We think that there is a basket of possible solutions. We do wonder whether Onehunga is one of them, but we don't know the answer to that. We are confident, though, that with just a little bit of brain power, there will be a solution. I think we suspect that the key to that will be more intense use of the remaining Ports of Auckland site rather than Onehunga. But do we know the answer at the moment? No. That's why we need to go into the facilitation phase.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. A lot of the questions have actually been asked, but really before you go further down the track with feasibility studies, shouldn't you really be out there asking the public, is this really what they want? And I mean, you're telling us that you're hearing that people are wanting it, but like Councillor Clow and others, I'm hearing something a little bit different. And one of the things that I'm really concerned about is that you're talking about the Ports of Auckland, that they could go up to Whangarei or they could go out to Onehunga or whatever. I mean, the Ports of Auckland is really, really very important to the Auckland economy, well, New Zealand. And before we start wanting to play around having feasibility studies or something, it doesn't feel as if really a lot of real thought has really gone into it. You know, we're looking here at saying it's going to be zero cost to the ratepayers and the taxpayers in one brief, and then the next minute we're hearing, well, there could be a cost. And then when we're listening to about Eden Park, well, Eden Park Trust actually owe a lot of money to the Auckland ratepayers, and you know, so there's a whole lot of things out there that it is quite concerning, because there is going to be it is a cost to the ratepayers, and I think before you go too far down the track, I think really you really have to get out there and you have to ask the people, is this really what they want? And I think Councillor Newman, what he was talking about, the blue collar workers down at the ports, you know, that's really a very big issue for the people of Auckland, and it doesn't feel as if there's been really any real thought. That's just my feeling. Thank you.
If I may, we have put an enormous amount of thought into this, and over 18 months, and there's a lot of brain power around the consortium. We have considered these issues deeply. We are at a point now, though, where we need to get this really tested. We believe that this idea will work, and that we have answers to the questions that are being asked. In terms of the public's attitude to this, we can only talk to you about what we see anecdotally, but it is overwhelmingly in support. There have been some polls which preceded the release of this, which were commenting on less optimal solutions, which were overwhelmingly in support of a waterfront stadium. But we need to move from the anecdotal to the factual, and we would like to undertake some polling to understand what the public thinks. There does come a point, however, where the public doesn't finally make these decisions. It's probably this body that has the primary responsibility. We do think that council is here to do the bidding of the people, and that's why it's important to understand what people really want. But we can only tell you that anecdotally, that we have had an unbelievably high level of support for this. In terms of the job creation issue, one thing that we're not hanging our hat on here with this project is the economic benefits that it would bring. We've not factored a single dollar of economic uplift into the modelling for this. All of that would be a bonus on top. But have no illusions that this is a wealth creator and a job creator for Auckland. Auckland needs facilities like this to be internationally competitive, and it's also something that we think Aucklanders want to enjoy and have fun in, but it is absolutely, definitely a job creator, not a job destroyer.
Just one other thing, going back to, I don't know if you can remember there was a campaign, Stop Stealing Our Harbour. There was a very big campaign on that, and I know there were actually councillors around this table that were very involved in that, so yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Lee?
Mr Chairman, I won't drag things out, so I'll forego questioning. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Newman?
Yeah, two. So, for all the thinking that you've put up so far, I haven't heard you answer Councillor Bartley's question on Onehunga. I haven't heard you answer Councillor Close's question on the relocation of sporting codes from other stadia. I haven't heard you answer Councillor Casey's questions on the number of dwellings that would be redeveloped at Eden Park. So, with all of these matters that haven't been resolved, what is it that you are asking me to do today?
Well, perhaps if we address each one of those things that you don't think we've answered, I can remember the last couple. In terms of the number of
Houses at Eden Park?
Housing at Eden Park, the current plan is for 2,500 residential units.
2,500, okay.
Which would accommodate around 6,000 people.
Okay, what about Councillor Cloe? Because you referred to RFA support.
Yep.
That's not what he was interested in. He's interested in the conundrum about moving codes from other locations, other stadia to this site.
Well, we haven't investigated into that level of detail yet. We're relying on what RFA are telling us, and they believe that this is a good solution.
Okay. What about Councillor Bartley's conundrum about the aspirations for the redevelopment of Onehunga?
Yes.
And the fact that what you're coming up with would put my workers at Onehunga when she doesn't necessarily want that?
Yes.
Fair enough.
So I think to go back a step, when we initially started talking about relocating cars off Bledisloe Wharf, 2 or 3 people within the consortium were involved in the future port study, and we were aware that Onehunga was a viable option at that time for car handling. The realities are that may now not be the case, and we are now aware, obviously, that Panuku have purchased the port from the ports of Auckland. So those are things that have changed in the fullness of time as we've got to this point. We're quite relaxed about the idea that the Onehunga option may need to be taken off the table, but because we believe that there are other solutions that will enable the car handling relocation.
Outside of Auckland?
No, within the existing port land holding as well. So the building of a 5-storey car park over a big portion of Bledisloe Wharf, that building could be built on a different location within the port land that's residual after the Bledisloe Wharf is decommissioned.
I just want to conclude with one thing that relates to polling and public support, and I just wonder if you see a risk of the perception, because when I knock on doors, I'm told the priority for me is the maintenance of parks, congestion, the state of Pararico Road, for example, etc., etc. Everyone will have a different manifestation of that narrative in their own ward, and I am told about the need for employment opportunities for my constituents, and yet here what I'm being presented with is a consortium of what appears to be corporate interests, which is fine, but the model that you're coming up with appears to require the extinguishment of property rights, the moving away from the principle that politicians don't enter into the business operations of port companies, and I'm not convinced that this doesn't come free to the public. So is there a perception here that actually you're coming with something that hasn't been properly considered, properly accounted for in the context of what Aucklanders' priorities are, and it would require us to completely recalibrate whatever it is that we're trying to achieve in the stadia space with our investment entities like the ports, and actually the priorities that we've already identified through our consultational long-term plan.
Do you want to talk to the issue around use of public money?
Yeah, sure. And forgive again my simplicity. There's a lot of questions in there. Thank you. Quite naturally, and I think it's anticipated, that we see a stage, a phase coming where we can dig into the fine grain of those. Based on our experience, we know that this works. One of the critical principles for this, when we talk about it being no cost to ratepayer and taxpayer, is that we believe that public money should be spent on the very much the public good, and the public, right now the public need is strong, and council are addressing that. However, we see the stadium as kind of a bit of fun, and we think public money should be for public need, and private money should be for the fun stuff. And that's kind of the big picture.
Okay, and thank you. Councillor Casey.
Well, just on the housing, just a last question. If 2,500 are going to Eden Park, where are the other 9,500 being
No,
built?
sorry, so to clarify, the 2,500 is the number of apartment units, and the number of residents is would be circa 6,000 for Eden Park and 6,000 for the Bledisloe Quarter. So 2,500 apartments translates.
Oh, so you're talking about people, not houses?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
And ultimately, are you demolishing Mount Smart Stadium?
That's not a decision for us to make. We
So what's in your plans for it?
For Mount Smart, we've left that to RFA to decide how they want to manage that going forward. There's obviously some value in that site for a range of options, but largely will be recreational, we suspect, but that's a decision for RFA.
Thank you.
That site, members, belongs not to Auckland Council, belongs to Mana Whenua.
Yes.
As the consortium understand. Thank you all. Look, can we just maybe just qualify the so-called support of two of our CCOs? Would I be correct in saying it hasn't gone to their boards, they don't support it outright, it's thank you for your enthusiasm? Would that be a fair echo of what you've heard from our two CCOs?
I think that's absolutely fair. I think, but to the extent that they are supportive and wanting to, I guess, provide assistance to us in terms of our next stage of development.
So they're being supportive of you as they would another entity that might approach them with a serious proposal. Well, I guess it's, look, I know that this has not gone to either of those boards, and it's you've probably made a similar presentation to senior management there. I would be surprised if they endorsed the proposal.
No, it's not. There's no formal endorsement at all from those organisations. You're correct.
Look, thank you. Look, thanks. You've heard me express some concern, but earlier, prior to this meeting. But look, thanks for igniting the public discussion about the waterfront. And I think that's one of the best things that's come out of this, and the earlier Archimedia proposal for beaches and a declaiming of the port land. And I think, you know, this all needs to go into the mix of us starting to think about our waterfront. We get these ideas and we tend to park them, and the council doesn't do anything. And I think what you've demonstrated is that there are some brilliant ideas. Look, this is an innovative idea. There's no, whether you like a stadium on the waterfront or not, and I've got questions about that, but there's some brilliance in this idea, as there was some, you know, masterful brilliance in the Archimedia idea, and there will be some brilliance to be brought to the conversation from others as well. I guess, members, the question for us is what we do with this and the Archimedia idea, and how we embark on a process that might start exploring the waterfront
once the port is signalled, well, it's already signalled for departure. It's what triggers that departure. So going into our city centre master plan refresh, and we'll be discussing that in our last meeting, I think that's the place where we can start to integrate some of these ideas into that part of the waterfront which we have not planned for. Remember, our waterfront plan does not include this part. It concludes at around about this part. So there's work to be done there. So look...
Sorry, point of order. I know it's very unusual, but...
What's the point of order?
The point of order is you're presupposing something there. I mean, what about Eden Park Trust Board coming with their presentation? We do a business case on the status quo and the demolishment of the North Stand and the covering in of Eden Park. I mean, you're setting it up as though this is what's going to happen.
No, definitely not. Quite to the contrary, Councillor, quite to the contrary. I'm actually saying there does need to be a plan of our waterfront. And there is a stadium study that you're aware of that locates identifies a preferred location to be then tested against the incumbent, which is Eden Park. And that work is clearly identified, yet to be done. What I'm saying is that there is a time where we will have to study the waterfront from Captain Cook going all the way through to mechanics and even the Point Erin bars. When do we do that? And we can consider that over the coming weeks, whether we want to embark on that or not. So I'm just leaving it at that. I am not landing or showing any preference whatsoever to this outcome or Archimedia's outcome. It is something to be considered. I'll leave it at that. I'll move the receipt and acknowledge the group. Thank you, Dave, Michael, Alistair and Richard for your presentation here today. Do I have a second?
Second.
Councillor Lee, thank you.
Thank you.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary,
Aye.
no. Declare that carried. We're going to take a 5-minute break, members.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.